"Stop staring at me like that," she snapped, spinning around so quickly that the hem of her long coat swirled in the cold wind. The night market was bustling with people, the scent of roasted nuts and fried bread filling the air, but everything seemed distant to her in that moment. Her fists clenched at her sides, and for a heartbeat, she looked like she might run away or fight. I wasn't starring," he stammered, his hand still midair as if he were frozen in place. The words stuck in his throat, but he felt compelled to say something, anything to explain himself. The blue-gray light of the highlighted his nervousness. Her gaze pierced him, sharp and unyielding, and for a terrifying moment he feared he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. But then, surprisingly, she leaned back, a faint smirk tugging at her lips. "You're really honest, aren't you?" she said, her voice softer now but still carrying an edge. "Most people would just lie, smile, nod, say something polite and meaningless, but not you." He blinked. He had no idea what she meant. I guess," he said cautiously, rubbing the back of his neck. "I just said what I thought about your figure." Her smirk widened and he saw something flicker in her eyes, a strange mixture of amusement, surprise, and something he couldn't quite identify. "Oh," she whispered, as if tasting the word. "You mean my body?" "Yes," he admitted, his voice barely audible over the noise of the crowd. His stomach churned. He had no idea why he said it. He hadn't meant to offend her, just honesty had slipped out, raw and unpolished. For a long moment she didn't move. Then, incredibly, she laughed. A low, melodic laugh that seemed to pull the air right out of him. "Most people would run if they said something like that," she said, still smiling. "But you didn't. You just said it, just like that." He swallowed hard, unsure whether he should apologize or retreat. But she raised a hand, palm open, as if to stop him. "No, don't. Keep talking." And that was how it started, the strangest encounter of his life. He had first noticed her earlier that evening, amidst the chaos of the market. She had been standing by a stall selling hand-carved toys, her hands brushing over the wooden figures with gentle curiosity. Most people had ignored her, treating her like just another passerby, but he had noticed the way she held herself, unafraid, commanding yet delicate, like someone who belonged somewhere entirely different than here. When he finally spoke, it was instinctive. "You look different, strong," he had said, unsure why the words came out, "like you could move mountains if you wanted to." Her reaction had been immediate, her eyes flashing with alarm before settling into that strange smirk. And now here she was, laughing, turning her head slightly to hide the faintest blush. "You know," she said, "honesty is dangerous and rare. I like that you're brave enough to risk it." He didn't know what to say. His heart pounded, partly from the adrenaline of being caught in this intimate moment with a stranger, partly from the raw intensity of her presence. I didn't mean to. I just said what I saw," he finally managed. "And that's why it matters," she said, taking a slow step closer. Her eyes searched his, sharp and assessing as if she could read his thoughts. "People lie all the time. They hide behind words, smiles, excuses, but you spoke truth. That counts for something." He swallowed again, realizing how much the street noise had faded around them, how her words seemed to pull him into a bubble outside of time and space. He could feel his palms getting sweaty, his chest tight, but something in him wanted to stay there, to listen, to understand. Then, without warning, her expression shifted. Her smirk faded, replaced with something softer, almost fragile. "But be careful," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Honesty can break hearts as easily as it can build them." Before he could respond, she turned abruptly and started walking away, disappearing into the crowd like a shadow that refused to be caught. He froze, unsure whether to follow or let her go, but one thought pulsed in his mind. "I have to see her again. I need to understand her reaction." As he stood there, rooted to the spot, the night seemed to pulse around him. Something had shifted in the air, a tension that felt larger than both of them, a sense that this encounter was the beginning of something neither of them could yet predict. And deep down, he knew that one honest remark had already set in motion a chain of events that would change both of their lives forever. He didn't know how long he stood there, frozen in the middle of the crowded street, watching her disappear into the throng. The market sounds returned slowly, vendors calling out, children laughing, the sizzle of food on open flames, but he barely noticed. His mind replayed every second of their encounter, every flicker in her eyes, every laugh, every pause. He had spoken one honest sentence, and yet somehow it felt like he had touched something far deeper, something that had made her heart skip a beat. And somehow he feared it had also wounded her. For hours after, he wandered through the streets, hoping for another glimpse, another word, another sign that she wasn't just a stranger passing through his life like a ghost. But she was gone, vanished like smoke. Meanwhile, somewhere on the other side of the city, she leaned against the cold stone wall of an abandoned alley, her breath shallow and uneven. The laughter she had offered him earlier now felt hollow, fragile, almost like armor. Her mind replayed the moment over and over. He saw me. He really saw me. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had spent most of her life hiding the truth about herself, her strength, her scars, the experiences that had carved her into who she was. People were drawn to her figure, to the presence she carried, but they rarely saw beyond it. They rarely understood the weight she bore beneath the surface. And then he had spoken, one simple, honest remark, and somehow it pierced through all of it. She pressed her palms against her temples, trying to steady her thoughts. She wasn't used to being vulnerable. She didn't know what to do with someone who refused to flatter her or lie to her. She wasn't used to trust, not in this way, not in years. Meanwhile, he couldn't stop thinking about her. He had replayed her words in his mind endlessly. Honesty is dangerous, can break hearts as easily as it can build them. Why did she say that? Was she warning him or warning herself? Unable to resist, he returned to the market the next day. The stalls were mostly the same, though a few new vendors had arrived. The scent of fresh bread and roasted nuts filled the air once more. He moved carefully, scanning every face, but she was nowhere to be seen. Days passed. Each day he returned, hopping against hope to see her again, hopping for a glimpse of that strange mixture of strength, humor, and fragility that had captivated him. And each day he left disappointed. Little did he know she was watching him from afar, quietly analyzing him. She had noticed how he lingered, how he spoke to the vendors, how he seemed different. Human, yes, but also honest, straightforward, unafraid of discomfort, qualities she rarely encountered. It wasn't just her figure he had noticed, it was the courage behind it, and that mattered more than he could possibly know. One night, weeks later, a sudden commotion at the edge of the city pulled them both into the same street. A group of young thieves had cornered a small child, demanding coins and threatening harm. Without thinking, he charged forward, his voice sharp, commanding, "Leave him alone." The thieves laughed, underestimating him, until he moved with a speed and precision that left them scrambling. They didn't know he had trained in hand-to-hand combat for years. They didn't know he had survived hardship that had sharpened his instincts. Within moments, the attackers scattered, leaving the child unharmed. She appeared from the shadows, watching the scene unfold. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for the first time she allowed herself a flicker of genuine admiration. Not only honest, but brave. He noticed her then, standing just a few yards away, her gaze fixed on him. Their eyes met, and a silent understanding passed between them. She had seen more than his words now, she had seen his actions. And in that moment, the walls she had built around herself began to tremble. For both of them, the encounter marked the first real shift. One honest remark had begun something neither of them had expected, something far larger than chance or coincidence. And as the night descended over the city, neither realized how deeply this meeting would change their lives, or how soon danger would force them to face truths neither could hide any longer. The wind howled through the narrow streets that night, carrying the scent of rain and smoke. He and she moved silently through the shadows, the child he had saved clutching his hand tightly. The night that had begun as ordinary had twisted into something far more dangerous. A gang of city marauders, known for their cruelty and unpredictability, had spotted him earlier. They hadn't forgotten the way he had humiliated them in front of witnesses, and now they were determined to make him pay. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, slow, deliberate, like a predator closing in. She glanced at him from the corner of her eye. "They're following us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Despite her usual calm, a sharp tension coiled through her body. He could sense it, the same way he had sensed her strength, her hidden resilience that first night he saw her. He tightened his grip on the child's hand. "Stay close, don't let go," he said. His voice was steady, controlled, though his heart hammered like a drum. He could feel her presence beside him, and something about it steadied him. Somehow, knowing she was there made him braver, sharper. The alley split into two paths, and instinctively he guided the child and her toward the narrower passage, the one that twisted unpredictably. The marauders followed, their shouts echoing off the walls, their footsteps growing louder, angrier. Then one of them appeared from the darkness ahead, a tall figure with a cruel grin and a knife that gleamed in the dim light. He stepped forward, blocking the path. "Going somewhere, hero?" the man sneered. He didn't hesitate. With a movement as natural as breathing, he deflected the knife with a sharp kick, sending the attacker stumbling backward. The child yelped in surprise, and she instinctively flinched, but only for a moment. Her hand shot out, grabbing a discarded metal rod from the ground. "What are you doing?" he hissed, keeping his eyes on the remaining marauders. "Helping," she said simply, her tone calm, almost serene, though her eyes burned with intensity. She didn't wait for approval. She advanced, swinging the rod with precision and strength, striking the attacker's shoulder with a thud that echoed through the alley. He grunted in pain and stumbled to the side, incapacitated but not seriously hurt. He felt a rush of admiration mixed with disbelief. She's not just strong, she's formidable. And more than that, she wasn't afraid. Most people would have panicked, run, or screamed. She didn't, she acted. The other marauders hesitated, startled by her sudden appearance and ferocity. That hesitation was all they needed. He lunged forward, moving with speed and precision, his movements fluid and practiced. Within moments, the threat was neutralized. The alley fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of the child and the two of them. She lowered the rod and wiped sweat from her brow. Her eyes met his, and for the first time, the tension in her expression melted into something else. Relief, yes, but also a flicker of connection. She began but paused, searching for the right words. Finally, she said, "You're incredible." He chuckled, a sound he hadn't realized he'd been holding back. "We make a good team," he said, though he felt the words carry more meaning than simple teamwork. The child tugged at his sleeve. "Thank you," the little one whispered, eyes wide and shining. "Thank you for saving me." He smiled, kneeling to meet the child's gaze. "No one deserves to be hurt," he said softly, "and I won't let anyone hurt you, ever." She watched him with a complicated expression, admiration, curiosity, and something deeper she couldn't name. She had met many humans, many people who claimed bravery, many who boasted strength. But something about him, his honesty, his courage, his refusal to hide behind pretenses, was different. It resonated. That night, as they walked the child home, the city seemed different. The darkness no longer felt oppressive. It felt alive with possibility. Danger still lingered, yes, but so did hope. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to consider that maybe she didn't have to face the world alone. He glanced at her, noticing the subtle shift in her posture, the way her eyes softened when she thought he wasn't looking. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. She hesitated, then nodded. "I'm better than okay," she admitted quietly. "For the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm not just surviving, I'm alive." He smiled, sensing the weight of her words, the unspoken story behind them. One honest remark, one unplanned encounter, had set in motion something neither of them could have anticipated. And neither of them yet realized just how far this connection would push them, how many obstacles they would face, how much danger they would endure, and how deeply their lives would intertwine. The night closed in around them, silent and watchful, as if the city itself was holding its breath. For them, the adventure had only just begun. The next morning, the city was calm, almost eerily so, as if the night's chaos had been nothing more than a dream. He walked through the quiet streets, still thinking about her, still replaying her strength, her confidence, and the way she had stepped into danger without hesitation. He didn't know why he was drawn to her, why her presence lingered like a shadow in his thoughts. Perhaps it was her honesty, so rare and raw, or the unexpected courage that mirrored his own. Whatever it was, he felt compelled to find her again, to understand her, to bridge the gap between curiosity and connection. He found her near the market, at a small stall selling hand-stitched leather goods. She was inspecting a belt, her fingers brushing over the material as if searching for hidden truths within it. She didn't notice him at first, and he allowed himself a moment to study her quietly. She had changed, not physically, her figure, posture, and presence were the same, but something about her demeanor was softer, more open. Her eyes flicked up and caught his gaze, and for the first time she smiled, not the smirk of amusement or caution, but a genuine smile, gentle and unguarded. "Hey," he said, stepping forward. His voice was careful, cautious, as if approaching something fragile. "Hi," she replied softly, her fingers still touching the belt. "You came back." "I wanted to see you," he admitted, feeling a slight heat rise in his cheeks. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." Her eyes softened, and for a long moment she didn't speak. Finally, she said, "I am better than okay, I think because of you." Her words were tentative, almost fearful in their honesty. He felt a surge of warmth at her confession, though he tried to mask it. "You didn't have to do what you did last night," he said, recalling how she had fought the marauders without hesitation. "You didn't have to put yourself in danger." Her lips curved slightly, but there was no defensiveness in her tone. "I didn't feel like I had a choice. You didn't just speak the truth to me, you acted it. You saved that child without hesitation, without thinking about yourself. And I couldn't ignore that. I had to act too." He was struck by her words, realizing how much weight they carried. She wasn't just acknowledging his bravery, she was revealing her own. Her honesty, like his, was not casual. It was a force she had spent years controlling, carefully shielding from the world. They walked together through the quiet streets, the child trailing behind safely with a small basket of bread from a vendor. She shared fragments of her past, carefully, cautiously, like dropping precious stones into his hands one by one. "I've lived most of my life hiding," she said finally, her gaze fixed on the cobblestones beneath her feet. "People, they see what they want to see. They comment on my appearance, on my presence, and they never ask what it took to get here. They never ask what it cost me." He listened quietly, understanding more in her silence than most would grasp in words. "And you think one honest remark could change that?" he asked softly. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed emotion. "Not just a remark," she said. "Your honesty, it was a mirror. You didn't see just the surface, you saw me. And in that, I saw myself reflected like for the first time in years I was allowed to exist without armor." He felt something shift inside him. He had never imagined that his simple words, unplanned and impulsive, could carry such weight. He realized then that courage and honesty were not just about action. They were about connection, trust, and the willingness to face vulnerability. For the first time, she allowed herself to walk beside him without pretense, without the careful calculation that had always governed her life. And for the first time, he saw the person behind the figure, the strength, the fragility, the hope. They paused near a small fountain in the city square, the sound of water filling the silence between them. She leaned slightly closer, and he noticed her hand tremble ever so slightly. "You really are different," she whispered, almost to herself. "Most people lie, most people pretend, but you choose truth, and that changes everything." He reached out instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Their eyes met, and in that moment the weight of their pasts, fears, and unspoken truths seemed to dissolve. And as the night sky began to deepen, dotted with the first stars, they both realized something quietly terrifying and exhilarating. One honest remark had not only revealed truth, it had begun to dismantle the walls around them, creating a connection neither had expected, but both desperately needed. The world around them felt different now. The danger, the chaos, the uncertainty, all of it had been a test. And in each other they had found not just bravery, but a reflection of something greater. The courage to be real, the courage to care, and the courage to trust. The city had never felt so tense. A new threat loomed on the horizon, one larger, more organized, and far more dangerous than the street marauders they had faced before. Word had spread of a ruthless gang attempting to seize control of key parts of the city, exploiting fear and chaos to expand their influence. He and she had been cautious, staying mostly in the shadows, avoiding trouble, yet trouble had a way of finding them. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red, the chaos arrived at their doorstep. The first warning came as the distant sound of shattering glass, followed by screams. The alley where the child lived erupted into chaos. Shops were being looted, and people ran screaming through the narrow streets. He grabbed her hand instinctively. "We have to stop them," he said. She nodded, her eyes narrowing. "Together," she replied. No hesitation, no fear, just the cold clarity of someone who had faced danger countless times before, yet never allowed it to define her. They moved through the streets like shadows, silent but deadly. He noticed how seamlessly she adjusted to each obstacle, leaping over debris, dodging falling crates, her movements precise and fluid. And yet it wasn't just physical skill that impressed him. It was her courage, the fearless clarity in her eyes that spoke of someone who refused to bow to fear. The gang had cornered a group of innocent street vendors, their weapons drawn and threatening. The leaders sneered, confident that no one would challenge them. They hadn't seen him or her yet. He stepped forward, shouting, "Enough, leave them alone." The leader laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "And who's going to stop us, you?" She stepped beside him, her presence commanding and undeniable. "Not just me," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "Both of us, and we will stop you." It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Honesty, courage, and the refusal to back down could inspire others, even in the face of overwhelming danger. The first attacker lunged at him, but she reacted instantly, throwing a precise kick that sent the man crashing into a stack of crates. He moved simultaneously, disarming another with a swift motion, and together they were a force of unity and determination. The battle was chaotic and brutal. Shouts echoed through the streets, and the clash of bodies and metal filled the air. Yet amidst the chaos, he found himself watching her, not just her strength, but her compassion. She didn't strike to harm unnecessarily, she struck to protect. After what felt like hours, the last of the attackers fled into the night, leaving behind frightened but unharmed civilians. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the faint scent of blood, but the streets were silent now. Victory had been earned, not through cruelty or intimidation, but through courage, honesty, and the unyielding resolve to protect the innocent. He turned to her, panting, sweat and dirt on both their faces. "We did it," he said, his voice a mix of disbelief and relief. She smiled, exhaustion softening the sharp lines of her face. "Yes," she said, "together." The city around them was quiet once more, but the events of the night had left a mark, not just on the streets, but on them. Something had shifted. The bond forged in honesty and tested in danger was now unbreakable. She looked at him then, eyes searching, vulnerable yet strong. You didn't have to be here," she murmured. "You could have walked away, chosen safety." He shook his head. "I couldn't, not when we, honesty brought us here. Courage brought us here, and now we protect because that's what matters." Her lips curved, and for the first time he saw her truly let go of the walls she had built around herself. I think I can trust you," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. And in that simple statement, he realized the full depth of what one honest remark had started. A single truth, spoken without fear, had grown into trust, courage, and connection, forces far stronger than either danger or fear. As they stood amidst the quieted streets, the city lights reflecting off the wet cobblestones, he knew this was only the beginning. Together, they could face anything. For both of them, one truth had begun a journey neither could have imagined. A journey of courage, resilience, and the power of honesty in a world too often built on lies. And somewhere deep in the night, unseen but felt, the city itself seemed to acknowledge them, not as mere humans, but as forces of change, courage, and hope. The next morning, the city was quiet again, but the air between them was heavy with unspoken thoughts. They walked side by side along the riverbank, where the water reflected the pale sunlight like fractured glass. Neither spoke for a while. Words felt unnecessary. Actions and glances had already said more than language could. Finally, she stopped and faced him. Her eyes were intense, searching, as if weighing whether to reveal something she had hidden for years. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice low, deliberate. He nodded, bracing himself. "Whatever it is, I want to hear it." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I wasn't always like this." Her hand brushed against the cold, stone railing. "I wasn't always someone who could fight without fear, who could face danger head-on. There was a time when I ran. I hid. I let people dictate who I was supposed to be, what I was supposed to be afraid of." He listened quietly, noticing the tremor in her voice, the vulnerability that had slipped through the armor she wore for so long. "What changed?" he asked gently. Her eyes met his, and for the first time she allowed herself to be completely exposed. "I realized that life doesn't wait for permission. That courage isn't something you're born with, it's something you choose every day. And honesty is the spark, the thing that makes you human, the thing that makes you real." He reached out, placing a hand on hers. "I see that in you," he said softly. "Every time you act, every choice you make, it's real. You're brave, not because you have to be, but because you choose to be." She swallowed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "And you? Why do you care? Why do you risk yourself, speak honestly, fight when it's dangerous?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "Because someone had to, because someone like you deserves honesty, courage, and trust. And because I can't stand by while the world is unfair, I can't stand by when people are in danger. That's who I am." Her hand tightened slightly around his, and for the first time she didn't pull away. "You're different," she whispered, almost to herself. "Most people, they lie, they cheat, they hide. But you're pure in a way that makes me afraid. Afraid to lose you, afraid to trust, afraid to let anyone see me." He smiled gently. "Then don't be afraid, I'm here, I'm not going anywhere, and you don't have to hide from me or from yourself." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she leaned slightly closer, resting her forehead against his shoulder. The weight of years of fear, isolation, and self-doubt seemed to lift, if only for a moment. "I've spent so long hiding," she admitted, "pretending I was untouchable, invincible, but I'm not. I've been scared, lonely, and uncertain. And yet, you've made me feel safe, seen, and understood in ways I didn't think were possible." He placed a comforting hand on her back. "You're not alone anymore, and you'll never have to be again." For a long moment, silence enveloped them, filled with unspoken truths and shared understanding. The world around them seemed to pause, the river flowing quietly, the birds silent, the city holding its breath as if it too recognized the significance of this moment. Finally, she pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting his once more. "One honest remark," she said softly, a small laugh escaping her, "changed everything. And now, I think I'm ready to face whatever comes next, not just with courage, but with someone who understands me." He smiled, the warmth of her words settling deep in his chest. "And I'm ready too," he replied. "Whatever comes, we face it together. No lies, no hiding, no pretending, just us, real, honest, alive." She nodded, and in that moment, the walls she had built around herself crumbled completely. Honesty, courage, and trust had forged a bond stronger than fear, stronger than danger, stronger than anything the world could throw at them. And as they stood there, side by side, hands entwined, they both understood the truth that had quietly grown between them. Bravery is more than action, and honesty is more than words. It is the bridge that connects hearts, the spark that awakens courage, and the force that can transform lives forever. The city, once shadowed by fear and chaos, now felt alive with possibility. And for both of them, the journey that began with one honest remark had become something far greater, a promise, a partnership, and the undeniable power of being truly human. The city was quiet that night, the glow of lanterns and streetlights reflecting off the wet cobblestones like scattered stars. He and she walked side by side, their hands entwined, moving through the shadows yet feeling completely unafraid. It had been weeks since that first encounter, the moment of honesty that had set everything in motion. Weeks of danger, chaos, and shared trials had tested their courage and deepened their bond. Now, for the first time, the world seemed to hold its breath, giving them a moment of peace. They reached the top of a small hill overlooking the city, the streets stretching out below like veins of light. He turned to her, noticing how the firelight danced in her eyes, reflecting strength, vulnerability, and something more profound: hope. "You know," he said softly, "when I first spoke to you, I didn't expect anything. I just said what I saw, what I felt. I didn't know it would matter this much." She smiled, stepping closer, her hand brushing against his cheek. "It mattered," she whispered. "It mattered more than you can imagine. That one honest remark, it changed everything. It made me see that I could be real, that I didn't have to hide, that courage and honesty could exist together." He took a deep breath, searching for the words that could match the intensity of the moment. "You've shown me so much too. Your strength, your fearlessness, your honesty, not just with me but with the world. You've reminded me what it means to fight, not just for survival but for something greater, for people who need hope, for truth, for what's right." Her eyes glistened with tears, but they were tears of release, of acknowledgement, and of trust. "I've lived so long behind walls," she said quietly, "so long hiding who I was, but you saw me. And now I want to face everything, not alone, but with you." He smiled, the weight of the journey behind them and the promise of what lay ahead settling in his chest. "Then we face it together. No lies, no pretending, just us, honest, brave, and alive." They stood there, silhouetted against the glowing city below, and in that quiet moment the world felt whole. All the dangers, all the chaos, all the fear, they had been necessary, shaping them, forging a bond stronger than either of them had known. She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "You know," she whispered with a small laugh, "most people wouldn't survive the trials we've faced. Most people wouldn't even notice. But you see the truth. You see people. You see me." He held her close, feeling the steady rhythm of her breath, the warmth of her presence. "And I always will," he said firmly. "Because honesty, courage, they're not just words, they're actions, they're choices. And I choose this, I choose you, every day, every moment." Her lips curved into a smile, one of full trust and quiet joy. "And I choose you," she replied, her voice strong despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "For everything, for honesty, for courage, for love." The city below seemed to hum with approval, the soft wind carrying their words across rooftops and alleys, touching the lives of those who needed hope without knowing why. One honest remark had begun a chain of events, one that had grown into something far greater than either of them could have imagined: trust, courage, and the undeniable power of humanity. As they stood there, arms around each other, the night sky opened above them, stars shining brighter than ever. The journey that began with words spoken without hesitation had led them to a truth more profound than any action or battle: that bravery, honesty, and love were the ultimate strength of a human heart. And in that moment, as the city slept beneath them, they both understood something clearly, deeply, and forever. One honest remark, spoken simply, without fear, had not just revealed truth, it had changed everything. For in honesty they had found courage, in courage they had found connection, and in connection they had found humanity at its finest. And that was a power no force in the world could ever break.